Northern Ireland, a small step to a giant adventure. Book your next giant adventure at discovernorthernireland.com.
Hello everyone, you're very welcome to our event, the Guapinol 8 Water Defenders. My name is Róisín O'Hara. I work for Trócaire, and we're delighted to be part of this year's Féile. In Honduras in September 2019, the Guapinol 8 were detained for peacefully resisting the exploitation of their community's natural resources by private business interests. The community were protesting against the operations of a mining company which had turned their river, a vital source of water, to mud. Almost 2 years later, and all 8 remain in pre-trial detention. Today, we will hear the latest on the community's campaign for justice and explore how the case highlights the ways that the state, the courts, and big business often work together to criminalise, intimidate, and stop the work of environmental and human rights defenders. We will also hear about Trócaire's work on this issue in Honduras. I'll now hand you over to Dr. Ciara Hackett, who will be our MC.
Hello everyone, I'm delighted to host this event organised by Trócaire. My name is Dr. Ciara Hackett. I'm a senior lecturer in the School of Law at Queen's University Belfast. I set up the Business and Human Rights group in Queen's along with a colleague, Dr. Ciarán O'Kelly. I teach business and human rights to undergraduate and postgraduate students in the law school, and I tend to host a number of events during the year on issues that touch on business and human rights. I work with the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission, particularly their Business and Human Rights Network. I'm involved in the Global Business and Human Rights Network as well as the UK-wide one. I continue, along with my students and colleagues, to respond to consultations from governments on business and human rights issues such as modern slavery. So this includes the UK and Irish governments and the Northern Ireland Executive. From an academic point of view, I'm interested in how corporations fulfil their duty to respect human rights and how remedy happens in cases where this respect is not met. So how victims are remedied for any impact that they are faced with. But perhaps of more general interest to the audience is recent work that myself and my colleagues have carried out on corporations' involvement in mother and baby homes. But however, we're not here to talk about me. Today, we're going to discuss the Guapinol 8, who are water defenders in Honduras in Central America. They have been held in jail without trial since September 2019 for peacefully resisting the exploitation of their community's natural resources by private business. For 10 years, a deadly conflict has played out in the community between those who wish to extract as much value as they can from the area and those who live there and depend on the river for life and livelihoods. Thousands of people have fled and 150 people have been murdered for opposing land grabs. In August 2018, the people of Guapinol began to again organise protests, this time to stop the activities of an iron oxide mine. The government granted the licence for the mine inside a national park and without consulting the community. The Guapinol 8 were detained on the 1st of September 2019 for peacefully resisting the exploitation of their community's natural resources. All 8 remain in pre-trial detention, despite the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention calling for their immediate release. The case highlights the ways that the state, the court system and private interests work together to criminalise, intimidate and stop the work of environmental and human rights defenders. Today we're going to hear from 2 speakers, Gabriela Soto, who is a community activist and the daughter of one of the men that is in prison, and Hervé Bund, Trócaire's country director for Honduras. First, we hear from Gabriela Soto, whose father is one of the Guapinol 8. Gabriela begins by sharing with us the experience of her community.
Bueno, pues la situación ante estos proyectos extractivos, tanto en las comunidades, en Guapinol, como en sector San Pedro, como en Tocoa, como en todo el país aquí en Honduras, pues viene siendo bastante agresivos, bastante violentos, porque vemos pues que estas empresas entran a las comunidades de forma pues ilegal, intimidando pues a las comunidades, entrando de formas ilegales, requiriendo permisos, pues ilegalmente, tienen los permisos de explotación, de exploración, pues de forma ilegal. Vemos que entran pues hostigando a las personas pues que luchamos en contra de estos proyectos extractivos, utilizando pues como es la policía, los militares a favor de las empresas extractivas, no a favor de las comunidades pues que luchamos en contra de estos proyectos extractivos. Y vemos que utilizan pues grupos de personas pues para intimidar a las personas que luchamos, pues de esa manera generando pues mucho miedo, mucho temor a las personas que estamos luchando en contra de estos proyectos extractivos, a las comunidades también que estamos en conjunto pues viendo de qué manera no nos destruyan nuestras fuentes de agua, ya que pues a la comunidad de Guapinol duró el agua sucia por 7 meses. Vemos desde ahí que el daño que ha venido a ocasionar a estas empresas mineras, estas empresas destructivas, pues es muy fuerte, desde que nos dañan nuestras fuentes de agua, nos quieren pues secar nuestros ríos, que es lo único que tenemos en nuestras comunidades pues para tener nuestra agua en nuestras casas. Vemos que ellos pues generan temor y miedo pues a nosotros los que luchamos ante estos proyectos extractivos. Bueno, hemos tenido muchas experiencias muy bonitas en la defensa pues de nuestro territorio, en la defensa pues del agua, de la vida. Experiencias muy bonitas creo que en las comunidades. La experiencia bonita que tuvimos pues fue, que yo no creo olvidar, fue la instalación de un campamento denominado Campamento por la Vida, porque pues en ese campamento vivimos cosas maravillosas, vimos que si solo había tortillita y frijolito, pues lo disfrutábamos entre todos los que convivíamos en ese campamento, dormíamos por las noches viendo las estrellas, pues disfrutar de lo maravilloso de la naturaleza y convivir con todos, pues tanto hombres, mujeres, pues niños, cosas que antes no estábamos acostumbrados a hacerlo, a convivir en conjunto, lo vivimos en ese campamento. Fue una experiencia muy bonita, siendo pues desalojados a los 88 días de tener ese campamento, pero pues nos desalojaron de ahí, pero no nos han quitado ese espíritu de lucha que tenemos como comunidades, como personas, porque sabemos pues, que no tenemos que dejar que estas empresas extractivas, esta empresa llamada Inversión de los Pinares, llamada Inversiones Ecotec, que es la que está destruyendo nuestras fuentes de agua aquí en Guapinol, pues no debemos de dejar que vengan y nos destruyan lo que es de nosotros, lo que nos pertenece como comunidades y que tenemos que defenderla.
Gabriela will now share with us some of the challenges her community faces in peacefully opposing the mine.
Bueno, hemos tenido muchos retos, muchos desafíos por parte de estas empresas extractivas. Pues desde el inicio vimos un desafío, un reto muy fuerte, como pues el no tener pues la policía, los militares, el Ministerio Público a favor pues de nosotros, del pueblo, de nuestra lucha. Siempre estos medios pues estuvieron pues a favor y ahí siguen estando a favor pues de esta empresa, de la empresa privada. La policía pues no ayuda al pueblo, sino al contrario, lo que hacen pues es agredirnos, porque es lo que han hecho en las protestas que hemos hecho, en el desalojo, lo pudimos ver, que tuvimos un desalojo bastante pues fuerte. Sí, solo terminar diciendo pues que también es un reto muy grande para nosotros, para nuestra lucha, porque pues el presidente de Honduras, Juan Orlando Hernández, pues vemos que no lo tenemos a favor también, sino está confabulado con la empresa minera otorgando concesiones que se ve que son ilegales y que lo que van a hacer es desplazar pues a las personas que vivimos en las comunidades y que pues que vemos que nos queda como pues luchar y no permitir que nos despojen de nuestros territorios. Ahí culminaría la pregunta. Bueno, hemos hecho muchas estrategias pues como comité, pues contemplados en visibilizar pues nuestras luchas a través de denuncias, a través de conferencias de prensa, a través pues de compartir en organizaciones tanto nacionales pues como internacionales, organizaciones de derechos humanos. Hemos tenido pues reuniones con las instancias de embajadas, gobiernos, con los países, pues Estados Unidos, pues países vecinos y pues tanto también en Europa, pues que sirven pues como para mantener un poco, pues mantenernos vivos pues en esta lucha, porque pues si no visibilizamos todo esto, pues quedaríamos aquí como luchando pues nosotros y pues sería como más fácil venir y pues desaparecer pues a cada uno de los que luchamos aquí en las comunidades. Hemos metido denuncias en la fiscalía que aunque pues no avanzan de ahí, pero pues sirven como para como que quede guardado de que pasó algún incidente, que está la denuncia, y que pues así de esa manera pues que pare tanta criminalización. Hemos hecho muchas denuncias ante las campañas de criminalización que se ha dado hacia nuestra lucha, pues vemos que son muy fuertes. Muchas denuncias al CONADE, al CONAPRE, pues siempre pues pidiendo que se respeten nuestros derechos. Hemos ido a la Procuraduría también y pues de esa manera se han logrado pues ir creando muchos mecanismos de defensa pues para las comunidades y para los que luchamos contra estos proyectos de muerte.
And finally, Gabriela shares what gives her hope for the future.
Pues a mí lo que me da esperanza, lo que pues que me mantiene viva mis fuerzas y mis ganas de luchar, es que pues que sacando esta empresa minera, pues nuestros ríos volverán a tener ese caudal hermoso, esas fuentes de agua cristalinas y pues que así podremos vivir pues sanamente, dignamente en nuestras comunidades sin tener que emigrar pues a otros lugares y tener que emigrar de nuestro país.
Thank you, Gabriela, for sharing your experiences with us. Now, I'm delighted to welcome Hervé Bund, Trócaire's Country Director in Honduras, to share more about this case and the situation of environmental and human rights defenders in Honduras more broadly. Hervé, thank you for joining us.
Hi, Kira, you're welcome.
Can you bring us up to date with where things are for the 8 men who are in prison now? Have there been attempts to release them?
First of all, let me start by saying that the trial of August 2019 didn't bring any evidence against the 8 men, didn't bring any evidence that they participated in the facts that are held against them. It has been now nearly 3 years since the judicial arrestment of the peaceful resistance to mining in Trócaire began. And in September of 2019, the judge issued a formal order of indictment against those 8 men on charges of aggravated arson and unjust imprisonment. And she ordered that they be sent to preventive detention, despite not justifying the measure as required by law. So we have deep concerns about the situation of the human rights defenders of Guapinol. Now we spent nearly 2 years in pretrial detention without any sound justification. As you know, the European Union has a keen interest on that case. The Guapinol 8 were nominated as finalists of the Sakharov Prize for Freedom of Thought in 2020. Unfortunately, the situation on the ground has not improved. Actually, in October of last year, one of the Guapinol's community leaders was killed in his home. His name is Arnold Joaquin Morazan, and he was one of the 32 community leaders criminalized in the Guapinol case. And he's the second one of the 32 criminalized leaders to be killed. And of course, that crime remains unpunished. There's also harassment of the community by military and police patrols, and they besiege the community on a regular basis, harass the leaders, and in particular women. Also, one development in the case at international level was in March of this year, when the working group on arbitrary detention of the UN urged the government of Honduras to release the 8 defenders immediately and to grant them the effective rights to compensation and reparation, because they deemed that on all what they've analyzed, that the lawyers team sent, all the information that the lawyers team sent, that those men are being held without any justification, and this is arbitrary detention. So yes, the community members and the lawyers have done all what they could to free them. They filed various amparo writs with courts, and they expected the General Attorney of Honduras and the Supreme Court of Justice to take necessary immediate measures and make a pronouncement in accordance with international standards. That would have entailed dropping the charges against the 32 water defenders criminalized in this case, and release those who are detained in jail at the moment. But that has not happened. We are now expecting a date for the start of the trial, because those men cannot be held more than 2 years in pretrial detention according to Honduras law.
Oh, okay. And how then has the COVID-19 pandemic impacted on all this, or has it had an impact?
Yes, it has indeed, because those men from the Trócaire Committee of Defense of Common and Public Goods have been jailed in an overcrowded prison where COVID has already spread. Thankfully, one of them caught COVID, but since he is young, he recovered from it. But now the Delta variant is very present in Honduras too. So yes, we're particularly worried. At the end of April 2020, the National Congress of Honduras reformed the Code of Criminal Procedure with the aim of reducing the overcrowding in Honduran prisons in order to prevent the spread of COVID-19. So that reform gave the power to judges to analyze or decide what type of measure should be applied. And despite a writ being filed with the President of the Supreme Court of Justice asking for these measures to be considered for the Guapinol 8, there was no success. Another consequence of COVID-19, let's say on the case, is that there's been a lockdown in Honduras for most of 2020. So the environmental defenders, activists couldn't exercise their right for freedom of expression. They couldn't go and protest. Whereas on the contrary, mining and extractive companies were able to keep working as normal. And the Honduran government even facilitated the obtention of environmental licenses online, so without the due diligence being applied on the scrutiny of those requests. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And how is Trócaire supporting the case? What particularly your involvement in this?
Yeah, Trócaire has been supporting communities to access land in that region since the 90s. So it's not something new for Trócaire to be involved with that part of the country. And also we've assisted communities in that part of the countries to prepare against hurricane and flooding. So we've supported the organizations of communities into this environmental committee of Trócaire. We've also provided legal and psychological support both to the men who've been jailed, to all the criminalized defenders, I said 32 of them, and of course to the family as well of those men, especially working with women on their security, on their psychosocial well-being, because women are maybe not being jailed in that case, but they are on the front line and the second line, and they are those who bear the brunt of the consequences when violence erupts in the community because of the pressure of the police and the military. And also there are those who are here doing all the advocacy, defending those who are being jailed. We've also developed research on the case, like for instance, on the impact of extractive industries on women. And we've also worked with national organizations on doing communication and advocacy on the case. It is definitely a priority case for us in Honduras.
A really valuable work. Now, Gabriela has shared with us about the situation of her community who are continuing to defend their natural resources as well as seeking the release of 8 men, including her father. It would seem that this case is not an exception. So could you share with us a bit more about the challenges of rural and indigenous communities in Honduras who seek to protect their land and livelihoods from corporate interests?
Yes, Honduras remains, according to Global Witness, the most dangerous place on earth per capita for environmental defenders. Even though some countries like Philippines or Colombia have got higher number of defenders being murdered per capita, because Honduras is a small country of 9 million inhabitants, this is the most dangerous place. Like just to give you a figure, since like the murder of Berta Cáceres in 2016, more than 40 environmental defenders were murdered in Honduras. And the reality is probably much higher because that only accounts for attacks that have been reported and verified. So yeah, the problem is that the country has based most of its development policies on the exploitation of raw materials and also the exploitation of cheap labor. The criminalization, of environmental activists and threats against them remains an ongoing issue. Also, corruption plays a role because in that case, the mining company obtained the license for the exploitation of a national park through corruption. So whereas communities often have no benefits from those projects, the state does not even protect their own people. And that's why it is necessary to have at international level a binding legislation on human rights and environmental due diligence, be it in Ireland for Irish companies, in Europe for European companies, and worldwide at the level of the UN. Some progress is being made, but unfortunately, this is still going at a slow pace.
Absolutely, I totally agree. And just on that then, is the criminalization of environmental and human rights defenders commonplace?
Yes, and it is actually even occurring at an increasing pace. In Honduras, people are victim of what is called selective justice. Like the public ministry often colludes with extractive companies so that claims against environmental defenders are processed at a very fast pace, whereas on the contrary, when environmental defenders and human rights defenders in general file a claim, this is treated very slowly, and this is very, very worrying, because even when there are death threats made against those defenders, there's little investigation taking place. So there is no respect as well for international conventions signed by the state of Honduras. Like, for instance, the International Labour Organization Convention 169, that actually grants the right to a free, prior, and informed consultation to communities before any projects that affects their territory can be implemented, but that's not being respected. So indigenous people are often the most affected because they live where those natural resources are, and there are those who have been for centuries. They know how to care for those natural resources, whereas extractive companies, be them mining companies, logging companies, or even hydroelectrical companies, manage to divide those communities, use violence against men and against women, and through also the corruption of some of the leaders, they manage to actually foster conflicts in those communities. So this, combined with, I said, the criminalization by the state of these defenders, makes the situation very, very preoccupying.
That just sounds awful. So maybe moving on to some of the progressions recently. On the 5th of July, David Castiel was found guilty of being a co-conspirator in the murder of Berta Cáceres. Can you explain the significance of this verdict to the work that you do?
It is indeed very significant. Berta Cáceres was murdered on the 2nd of March 2016. So it's been 5 years, a very, very long battle that was fought by, first of all, the family of Berta Cáceres, the Council of Popular and Indigenous Organizations of Honduras, called the COPIN, the organizations that Berta Cáceres founded, and many, many activists around the world and in Honduras. It is very significant because David Castillo was the former boss of the company. So him being found guilty of murdering Berta Cáceres as a co-collaborator is definitely a landmark. Basically, it's the first time that a high executive from a company has been standing in a trial in Honduras, so he's been declared guilty, and he could face between 20 and 30 years in jail. And what is also very important is that the High Court really specified that Berta Cáceres was murdered for leading the campaign to stop the construction of the dam, and because that dam because that opposition, let's say, led to delays and financial losses for the company. So this is definitely a beacon of hope. As Berta Cáceres, the daughter of Berta Cáceres, said yesterday, that power structures did not manage in this case to corrupt the justice system. And she was referring herself to the wealthy family and very well-connected family that is actually owning the DESA company that commissioned the murder of Berta Cáceres. Cáceres. So yeah, this is a huge significance in a country where 90% of crimes against environmental activists remain impune. And this is a path, this is a victory and in the path for the struggle for full justice to be made. I said the shareholders of the company have not even been interviewed yet. We understand that an investigation has started against one of them, but that might take like a few years before the case is actually brought to justice, that a trial can be held. So this is definitely significant. This is a landmark, but this is only one step in the long path for justice in this case.
Absolutely. So it's a monumental verdict, but it does show the potential there for those of you that are seeking justice in that area. So finally then, the conversation with Gabriella ended with her sharing of what gave her hope. And so we're going to finish by asking you the same question. What gives you hope and inspires you in this work despite all the challenges?
Really what inspires me is really the fact that those environmental defenders and human rights defenders in general in Honduras, they fight for their dignity to be respected because they've been victims of injustice. Those people are men and women are very often in situation of poverty, whereas there are actually those who are protecting the environment at the time when the world so badly needs that. So that really inspires and that motivates me as well. This is I've been working nearly 20 years for Trócaire, and access to justice for victims is a strong source of motivation for me. And also, you know, them defending the right for self-determination is so inspiring. And also what brings me hope is really seeing the solidarity of so many, like especially in the case of Berta Cáceres or even the case of Guapinol, the solidarity of so many men and women all over the world, including in Ireland. The Irish population has been really responsive to what the work we've been doing in Honduras, and it's definitely very motivating.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Hervé, for taking the time to speak with us today and telling us about the work that you do. Thank you also to Gabriella for sharing her powerful story with us. To end, I'll pass you to Trócaire to make a few final remarks. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ciara. What's certainly clear from listening to Gabriella and Hervé is that lots needs to be done to protect human rights and environmental defenders from criminalisation and attacks by big business. This is one of the key aspects of Trócaire's campaign on business and human rights, which is focused on ending the culture of corporate impunity, not just in Honduras, but around the world. If you would like to know more about this campaign and get updates on ways to take action, go to the address on screen and join our campaign's mailing list. Finally, I'd like to give a huge thanks to our MC, Dr. Ciara Hackett. Thanks also to my colleague Hervé and to Gabriella for joining us from Honduras. A huge thanks also to the Féile and all who are part of organising it. We really appreciate being part of such a fantastic programme of events. Most of all, thanks to everyone who joined us. Goodbye.